It's definitely been a while since we last took a look at Call the Midwife, but I am so glad that I finally gotten a chance to sit back down and rewatch season 4 to look out for all of the knitting and fiber crafts in there. And speaking of general knit things, crafting things, I wanted to start with Violet's Haberdasherie shop. Is it Haberdasherie? The name escapes me at the moment, but Violet's shop, which is full of all sorts of things that you might need to do to knit something, sew something, crochet something. You can find patterns for sewing and knitting in there, and I just love all the glimpses that we get inside her shop this season. Before we even go inside, you can see that the sign on the door says Scotch double knitting, and I think that's a sign that she uses to say whether she's open or closed. The knitting ball with the 2 knitting needles stuck through it. Really cute. We've got an entire back wall filled with balls of yarn that you could potentially purchase, and I think just the slightest hint of skeins of yarn too that first need to be wound before you knit them, or at least I prefer to wind them before I knit with them. And there are so many other things that I wish I could get a better glimpse at inside of this shop. I think we have fabric bolts that you could purchase for making things. I see sewing patterns that look really nice and vintage. I wonder if at any point there were any knitting kits included in there, because I have a few knitting kits myself from the 50s and 60s and they seem pretty popular too. If this shop existed in my town, I would be so happy. It looks like such a cozy, cute place. I always enjoy these scenes where we get to see glimpses of people knitting. I think in the previous seasons and in this one, Sister Monica Joan is most often shown knitting. Here we see her knitting what I think is a pair of blue baby booties. She's also knitting in the style that I have heard of referred to as parlor knitting style, which is a throwing style of knitting, but you're holding the needle in the right hand slightly differently from I think English style knitting typically is done, or at least what I know of. I am not as familiar with any kind of styles that are non-continental because that's what I grew up knitting and that's how I know to knit and how everyone in my family knits. Associated with this scene is also like a really fun exchange, I think, which probably a lot of us knitters or crafters in general have experienced. And Mrs. Bissett is in this class and she is kind of talking about how she got a new electric washing machine. And Sister Monica Joan is concerned because if you wash your woolens in there, the fibers will get all disordered or felted. And I don't know about you, but I have managed to felt a few of my knits, unfortunately.
The fibres will become disordered and the very essence of the garment lost.
Thankfully nowadays, I mean, I don't know what washing machines were like in the 60s, but we have the gentle or woolen cycle, which will hopefully not felt them too much. And we also have superwash wools. Maybe I wouldn't put it through a vigorous cycle, but can stand to a little bit more vigorous washing than traditional wool hand knits could. We also see a really lovely knitting basket of Mrs. Bissett. She is knitting for her new arrival, and I think it's really fun to see those kind of knitting baskets. And it's not just that they show the characters knitting, but they show the notions around what you need for knitting. And a lot of people, including me, use knitting baskets. One thing that stuck out to me is that the needles stuck into the wool in the knitting basket are not matching colors. I own a lot of vintage needle sets, and if you have a needle size, a pair of needles from the same manufacturer and the same size, they should be the same color. So what I notice here is that if it's the same needle size that she's found needles for this particular project, they are not matching, and I can relate to that so much. I lose, unfortunately, knitting needles all the time, and I have a lot of vintage sets where I don't have 2 of the same size all the time, but because I've acquired so many different ones, a lot of my needle sets are mismatched. So I relate, and my knitting basket often looks like that too. And right after we see her knitting basket, Mrs. Bissett is knitting a pair of yellow baby booties. You might notice she's knitting it flat. A lot of the vintage knitting baby booty patterns that I've seen are knit flat and then seamed up later. And I think it's a really beautiful kind of tie-in throughout the episode where Mrs. Bissett is knitting for her future baby in expectation of her arrivals, and so she knits these booties so that her baby's feet will never be cold, and unfortunately she has one stillborn baby, and the booties are used as a way to remember her, remember baby April. One goes with baby April and one stays with her twin brother who survived. Call the Midwife is always a show that makes me quite emotional, and I think a lot of you have mentioned that too. I always kind of have to be in a little bit of the right mindset to watch it, and this scene always hits me pretty hard, especially recently. I've mentioned it before, but I lost someone close to me a while ago now, and when she got ill, I knit us a matching pair of socks. So where the main color of the foot was brown and the accent was blue for her on the heels and toes, and mine was the opposite, and she wore that throughout her treatment. And when my friend's illness progressed and she knew that she wasn't going to make it, her request was that she would be buried in those socks, and that connection that we have. And every time I wear my socks, it's very moving and touching, and Call the Midwife, it really hits at the core of a lot of things. I don't know, I relate a lot to that particular scene, especially because they show that Mrs. Bissett wasn't able to finish the baby booties before her babies arrived. And so as part of working through her grief, she worked on those baby booties together with some of the nuns, and I just thought it was a really beautiful representation of a lot of what knitting can represent beyond just, you know, the joy of crafting, which is definitely there, but there's a lot of love and thought and meditation put into every stitch in situations like this. So it definitely struck some chords for me, and was beautiful to watch, even if it was incredibly devastatingly sad. Speaking of the babies and children's knits, there are always so many baby knits scattered throughout the entire episodes. I really loved one in particular where you can see all of the baby knits that were made spread out across the bed. It's just like a pile of baby clothes. And again, another thing that really resonated with me, because we recently, actually just a few weeks ago, welcomed my first nephew into the world, and I'm so excited, but he is drowning in knits. All of the family, we all knit profusely. And baby knits are so fun because they're so small, so I can't even tell you the piles of knitted outfits that he has, and it's kind of perfect. We were all kind of excited that he was due in October because it means that he can wear so many of the knits throughout the winter season. So I love seeing kind of the echoes of that back then and today. I don't know how typical it is in the US for that to happen. I'm sure that it happens, especially for people who knit a lot. My nephew is born in Germany, and at least from what I know, or from what my family is, every one of us knit a lot. So at least there, or in my limited experience, it's very, very common for new babies to be absolutely layered in wool. We went all out for them. And going a little bit older in the show, it's not just, I mean, the baby knits there are so many of them. You see so many baby blankets, especially crocheted baby blankets. You see a lot of baby jackets and baby booties, baby hats, but you also see older children in knitwear, and there's quite a few of them, but I decided to kind of focus on this one particular one, which is a striped sweater that a young girl is wearing, and I just really liked it because it almost had like a faux V-neck to it a little bit. I have knit well, at least it's not very similar, but it's reminiscent to me of another top that I've knit from the 1940s where it looks like you're wearing a shirt underneath a vest, but it is all just one knit top. And this kind of evokes that similar feeling where it almost looks like you're wearing a V-neck sweater with a turtleneck collared sweater underneath it. And I always like those. I feel like you're adding an extra layer of interest to a particular piece. It's not just a striped sweater, it's not just a plain sweater, but it's kind of like that mock V-neck with a turtleneck underneath it sweater. There are a few knit cardigans and sweater in this episode that I could have chosen to speak about, but I've decided to focus on Nurse Barbara Gilbert's pink cardigan. This season is the season that Nurse Gilbert is introduced. This cardigan is the one where she meets everyone else in, and I really enjoy it for a few reasons. First of all, that baby pink color, well, not baby pink, it's not baby pink in my eyes, it's not necessarily hot pink, but it's definitely like a vibrant pink, like a berry pink almost. I really like the cheerful colors, and some of the vintage pieces that I own too are in these like really bright, vibrant, vivid colors. They just are really fun for me. This particular cardigan, I think, is also an interesting moment in time because in the 1940s and 30s, the cage of your knitting was tiny. You're using fingering weight yarn, like 8 stitches an inch, and at least from my personal collection, as you move through the mid 50s, end of 50s towards the 60s, chunkier and chunkier knits became more common, especially marketed as easy knits or quick knits. Cardigans especially were knit a little bit more chunky. I have found patterns from the 40s that are knit in larger gauges, so fewer stitches per inch. There's one in particular that kind of reminds me of this cardigan that Nurse Gilbert is wearing. It kind of has those horizontal columns with some texture pattern. This pattern's from the 40s, and like I said, it's marketed as a quick knit. I found a few other vintage cardigan patterns that remind me of this one. I feel like if I spend a few days looking at it, I could potentially find the exact pattern that this is from, because in my past episodes reviewing and looking at the Call the Midwife knits, I have found the exact patterns that they copied. So I know that they reference existing vintage patterns, but I couldn't find it in my search of a few hours today. Maybe one of you will find it, but there's another one that reminded me of it. However, this sleeve construction is different. So you'll notice on mine as well that I'm wearing, this is a vintage piece. It's not a cardigan, it's just a sweater. Pattern goes vertically, so from top to bottom on the body. And on this one and in the one that Nurse Gilbert is wearing, it goes from top to bottom on, like from shoulder to wrist on the sleeves. This other one that I showed as an example that looks kind of similar because it has those vertical columns, the kind of texture, slightly larger gauge, has the pattern going in this direction along the sleeves, which I believe means that the construction is actually the sleeves and body in one. So when you get to the underarms, rather than decreasing for the armholes, you're actually increasing to knit your sleeve like this, attached to the body. Kind of neat. This last pattern that I found I think is the closest to the cardigan in the show, because you've got the V-neck construction, you have ribbing as the button band details, ribbing at the bottom at the arms, vertical columns from the shoulder to the wrist on the arms, and it is a raglan construction. So if you look at Nurse Gilbert's cardigan, it is very obviously a raglan construction. And I'm also very curious about the pattern details. The ridges look like garter stitch details, but I can't tell what makes the column stand out. Like, is there some sort of knit two togethers that are happening there, but it doesn't really look like a lace pattern. So there's so much that I want to know about this one, and I wish I could find it. It is a really bright, fun, textured cardigan that I would love to have in my personal collection. I love cardigans. I was also really excited when I saw some knitted children's toys show up in the show. We have a knitted bear and a knitted clown. Personally, I never really enjoyed clown toys as a child, but this knitted clown actually looks kind of cute. But in the 40s and 50s, at least from what I've seen, there were a lot of patterns for knit children's toys. Whole collections of toys. I used one as a template to knit my ducks. I think in more modern day fiber arts and fiber crafting, we knit toys and little figures and little stuffed animals. More commonly, we do crochet rather than knitting. And I think it's interesting because in the 40s and 50s, I find it's a lot more common to knit the toys than to crochet them. And it also means that sometimes your construction, when I'm looking at some of the knit patterns for toys, has to be a little bit unique or unexpected in order to make the shaping work. Versus, I think what we've found out with crochet is that it's really nice to do structuring and shaping in crochet, so the amigurumi works really well nowadays. But I still do like looking at the knit toys and all of the different ones that are available and out there. I think there's some really cute ones that I'd like to make. I mean, obviously, I made a lot of ducks because I thought they were adorable. The last category I want to talk about, but definitely not the least important, I saved the best for last, I think, are the tea cozies. I love tea cozies, and they feature so far in every season. We have a very typical, I guess I would call it almost a checkerboard style tea cozy. We see it often and a few times throughout the season at Nanada's house, and I think that's a really great thing that they do is they continue some outfits throughout the episodes, throughout the seasons. They continue tea cozies throughout the episodes and throughout the season, so it's really fun to spot things that come back again. This particular tea cozy construction style is, I guess maybe fluted is what I would call it. There are a lot of vintage patterns that have this particular style of tea cozy, and you can actually see two different ones of this construction in this season. One is checkerboard, where you have the alternating colors across the different flutes, and the other one is the stripes. But they are both the fluted construction, which basically means that when you're doing color changes, rather than leaving a long float in the back to leave your piece flat, what you do is you pull that float really tight. And so the section that you just knit in color A, instead of laying flat, you pull that float really tight it'll go like that, and you'll have a fluted section, and those lie directly against each other, and so you get a bunch of flutes around your tea cozy. It looks really nice. I don't know if I prefer the checkerboard one or the striped one. I would probably have to do the same that they did and make one of each depending on what I felt like using on a particular day, but they do insulate your teapot really, really well. I do have a vintage one that I've tried out on one of my teapots. I don't have it, so I can't show it to you, but I hope I can soon. It does keep your tea really nice and warm. And then my favorite tea cozy that we have seen so far. We saw it last season, and we get some really, really good looks of it this season. And this is the broomstick lace tea cozy. I think we saw it at Nanada's house last season, but this season it is at the doctor's house with Sheila, who is now married and they're living together. And I think that's kind of like a cute story where maybe she originally made that tea cozy at Nanada's house, or they decided to gift it to her to have something. I mean, she goes back often, but to have something in her own home from her previous one. I don't know. I love those details and I like making up those backstories myself. However, last time we saw this, we didn't see it in very much detail, and I couldn't tell if it was crocheted or if it was knitted. And I think from the more detail up close shots, this tea cozy is knitted, and the underlayer is knitted in almost a garter stitch fashion in that deeper blue, and the lighter blue-green on top is broomstick lace. But it's not, I've looked up crocheted and knit broomstick lace patterns, and none of them look exactly like this tea cozy. I've been able to find broomstick lace tea cozies, but none that look like this pattern, or at least not vintage ones. They lean a little bit more modern. So again, if any of you sleuths are out there that like looking for vintage patterns for tea cozies, feel free to let me know if you find this, but this is one that I think would be really interesting for me to maybe dive into and see if I can recreate it and knit it myself, because like I said, since I saw it for the first time, it has been my absolute favorite tea cozy. I would love to have one of these myself. Speaking of all of these lovely tea cozies, I maybe want to hint, hint, nudge, nudge that a friend of mine has thrown out an idea of maybe like a tea cozy knit along as I continue, and maybe she joins in reviewing some of these seasons of Call the Midwife, some of the knits on there and other things that show up. So just something to keep in mind, an idea that I'm teasing, hinting, throwing out there. So if there's any tea cozies that you really like, that you're interested in, vintage patterns that you enjoy, or anything like that, maybe keep that in mind. And I think that I'm going to stick with reviewing more of these cozy knits in Call the Midwife in future seasons. Maybe once a month we can look forward to that. I'll try. At least. We'll see how that goes. Thank you again so much for watching. I know that we all lead really busy lives, and I appreciate that you decide to spend some of your time with me. If you enjoy videos like this, anything about vintage, knitting, crocheting, historical fiber crafts, I've got some things coming up for you that you might enjoy, so feel free to subscribe. Thank you again, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye!